September 15th, 1943, 28,000 feet above the North Sea. Flight Lieutenant James MacLachlan banks his Supermarine Spitfire Mark IX hard left, his wingman Flight Sergeant Tommy Caldwell, maintaining precise formation just 800 feet to starboard. Below them, a formation of Focke-Wulf, 190 fighters, climbs through 24,000 feet, black crosses, stark against winter camouflage paint schemes. MacLachlan keys his radio transmitter twice, the agreed signal. No words needed. Caldwell acknowledges with a gentle waggle of his wings. The two Spitfires begin their descent, not in the traditional line-astern formation that Royal Air Force pilots had used since 1918, but in something new. Something that violated 25 years of fighter doctrine, but had been proven in blood over the western desert, Sicily, and now the skies of occupied Europe. They were flying the Finger Four formation, and they were about to demonstrate why pairs of fighters working in coordinated teams could achieve kill ratios that individual pilots, no matter how skilled, could never match. The German pilots below them, veterans of the Eastern Front with dozens of victories between them, were flying in the same formations their predecessors had used over the trenches of the Western Front. They were about to learn that the fundamental mathematics of aerial combat had changed forever. The transformation from individual dogfighting to coordinated pair tactics represents one of the most profound evolutions in military aviation history. It was a change born from necessity, refined through desperate innovation, and proven through the systematic analysis of aerial combat that cost hundreds of thousands of lives across 6 years of global warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story begins not with the sleek fighters of 1943, but in the muddy airfields of France in 1918, where the basic principles of fighter combat were first established. During the Great War, aerial combat was fundamentally individual. Pilots flew alone or in loose formations, engaging enemy aircraft in single combat that resembled medieval jousting more than modern warfare. The legendary pilots of that era, Manfred von Richthofen, Eddie Rickenbacker, Billy Bishop, achieved their victories through personal skill, exceptional marksmanship, and intimate knowledge of their aircraft's capabilities. The Red Baron's 80 confirmed victories came from his ability to position his Albatross fighter for deflection shots, his understanding of energy management, and his tactical genius in choosing when to engage and when to withdraw. This individualistic approach to aerial combat became doctrine. Fighter pilots were trained as lone wolves, taught to seek out enemy aircraft and engage them in single combat. Squadron formations existed primarily for navigation and mutual protection during transit to and from combat areas. Once battle was joined, formations dissolved into individual duels scattered across miles of sky. The interwar period reinforced these concepts. Air forces around the world studied the lessons of the Great War and concluded that future aerial combat would follow similar patterns. Fighter pilots would be elite individuals, modern knights of the air, who would achieve victory through superior skill and aircraft performance. Training programs emphasized individual marksmanship, aerobatics, and aircraft handling. Pilots learned to fly in formation during peacetime maneuvers, but combat doctrine assumed these formations would break up immediately upon contact with the enemy. The assumption seemed logical. How could pilots maintain coordination while maneuvering at high speed under fire? The Royal Air Force's official Fighter Command Tactical Instruction, No. 8, published in 1937, explicitly stated that fighter formations should spread out upon sighting the enemy to allow individual pilots freedom of action. Similar doctrines existed in the German Luftwaffe, the French Armée de l'Air, and the United States Army Air Corps. When war erupted in Europe in September 1939, these theories faced their first test during the Battle of France. Royal Air Force Hawker Hurricane squadrons, operating from French airfields, flew in rigid V formations, typically 3 aircraft in a triangular pattern with the squadron leader at the point. Upon engaging German fighters, these formations would break up, leaving individual pilots to fend for themselves. The results were catastrophic. During the 6 weeks of fighting from May 10th through June 25th, 1940, the RAF lost 435 aircraft in combat. German losses totaled 298 fighters and bombers combined. The loss ratio heavily favored the Luftwaffe, despite the fact that Hurricane pilots were flying from their own bases with shorter transit times and more opportunities for rescue if shot down. Squadron leader Peter Townsend of No. 85 Squadron kept detailed records of his unit's combat encounters during the Battle of France. His analysis, submitted to Fighter Command in July 1940, identified a critical problem. RAF pilots operating individually after formation breakup were being overwhelmed by German fighters working in coordinated pairs. Townsend observed that German pilots rarely engaged in traditional single combat. Instead, they operated in two aircraft teams, where one pilot would engage an RAF fighter directly, while his partner positioned himself to attack if the British pilot gained an advantage over the first German. This simple tactical innovation meant that any RAF pilot who succeeded in gaining firing position on one German fighter would immediately find himself under attack from a second. The mathematics were brutal. An individual pilot, no matter how skilled, could only engage one target effectively. Two pilots working as a coordinated team could engage two individual opponents simultaneously, creating a 2-to-1 advantage even when outnumbered in total aircraft. But the German tactical system was more sophisticated than simple numerical advantage. The Luftwaffe had developed these tactics during the Spanish Civil War from 1936 through 1939. German pilots flying Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters in support of Franco's nationalist forces had experimented with various formations and combat techniques while engaging Soviet-supplied aircraft flown by international brigade pilots. Major Werner Mulders, who would later become one of Germany's highest-scoring fighter aces with 115 confirmed victories, pioneered what the Germans called the Rotte system. Two aircraft flying, approximately 1,000 feet apart, with the leader responsible for navigation and target selection while the wingman maintained position and watched for threats. The Rotte offered several critical advantages over individual combat. First, it provided mutual support. If one pilot became engaged in a turning fight, his partner could maneuver to attack the enemy from a different angle. Second, it enhanced situational awareness. 4 eyes were better than 2 for spotting enemy aircraft, especially in the confused environment of multi-aircraft combat. Third, the Rotte allowed for tactical flexibility. The leader could engage targets aggressively, knowing his wingman would cover his escape route. The wingman could position himself for attacks of opportunity, while the leader occupied the enemy's attention. Most importantly, the system was scalable. 2 Rotten flying together created a Schwarm, a 4-aircraft formation that provided even greater tactical flexibility. During the Battle of Britain from July through October 1940, this tactical superiority became apparent to RAF Fighter Command. Flight Lieutenant Johnny Johnson, who would finish the war as the RAF's highest-scoring fighter pilot with 38 confirmed victories, later described the learning process as painful and expensive. Royal Air Force squadrons flying Supermarine Spitfires and Hawker Hurricanes continued, using close formation flying developed for air shows and ceremonial purposes. These formations looked impressive during peacetime demonstrations, but they were tactical disasters in combat. Pilots flying wingtip to wingtip had no opportunity to scan for enemy aircraft. They were focused entirely on maintaining position relative to their formation leader. When German fighters attacked, these tight formations would break up immediately. Individual RAF pilots found themselves scattered across the sky, each fighting his own battle with no coordination or mutual support. The results were predictable. During the height of the Battle of Britain in August and September 1940, Fighter Command was losing pilots faster than the training system could replace them. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, commanding RAF Fighter Command, commissioned a detailed analysis of combat reports from July through September 1940. The study, completed by Wing Commander Douglas Bader and Squadron Leader Peter Stanford Tuck, revealed that RAF pilots achieved significantly higher survival rates and kill ratios when they inadvertently operated in loose pairs rather than individually. The analysis showed that pilots who maintained communication and visual contact with at least one other aircraft during combat were 3 times more likely to survive their first 10 combat sorties. Pilots operating completely alone had a mortality rate exceeding 40% during their initial combat tour. The mathematics suggested that individual heroics, however skillful, were inadequate against coordinated team tactics. Squadron leader Adolf Sailor Mallan, a South African pilot flying with No. 74 Squadron, began experimenting with modified tactics in September 1940. Instead of breaking formation immediately upon sighting enemy aircraft, Mallan's pilots would split into pairs, with each pair maintaining mutual support while engaging different targets. The results were immediate and dramatic. No. 74 Squadron's kill ratio improved from 1.2 German aircraft destroyed per RAF loss to 3.8 to 1 within 6 weeks of implementing pair tactics. Mallan's innovations spread informally through fighter command, as pilots shared experiences during brief rest periods between combat sorties. By November 1940, several RAF squadrons were experimenting with loose pair formations. Pilots would take off in traditional close formation for navigation and radio discipline, then spread out into widely spaced pairs before entering combat areas. The transformation wasn't uniform or systematic. It developed organically as individual squadron commanders and flight leaders tried to improve their unit's survival rates. The Royal Air Force officially adopted Finger 4 formation tactics in March 1941, nearly 2 years after the war began. Air Ministry Tactical Memorandum No. 14 stated that fighter squadrons should operate in 4 aircraft sections arranged as 2 pairs, with aircraft separated by approximately 800 to 1,000 feet laterally and 300 feet vertically. The memorandum was based on combat analysis and prisoner interrogations that revealed German tactical superiority. But institutional change was slow. Many RAF pilots had trained for years using close formation tactics. Squadron commanders, some with decades of experience, resisted changes that seemed to contradict everything they had learned about military aviation. The resistance wasn't entirely unreasonable. Loose formations were more difficult to control. Radio communication in 1941 was unreliable, with frequent equipment failures and limited range. Navigation was more challenging when aircraft were spread across several square miles of sky rather than flying wingtip to wingtip. Weather conditions over northern Europe meant that formations often had to penetrate cloud layers, where visual contact was impossible. How could pilots maintain coordination when they couldn't see each other? The traditional answer was tight formation flying that kept all aircraft within visual range regardless of conditions. But combat results continued to demonstrate the superiority of pair tactics. Squadron leader Johnny Johnson, now commanding No. 616 Squadron, implemented intensive training in loose formation, flying during early 1942. His pilots practiced maintaining visual contact and radio communication, while separated by distances that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Johnson's training program emphasized mutual support techniques. Pilots learned to maneuver as pairs, with each pilot responsible for protecting his partner's blind spots while the partner engaged enemy aircraft. They practiced coordinated attacks, where one pilot would approach a target from one angle while his partner positioned himself for a follow-up attack from a different direction. The psychological aspects were as important as the tactical ones. Pilots who knew their partner was watching their back could engage more aggressively. They could pursue fleeting opportunities without constantly checking over their shoulders. The confidence that came from mutual support translated directly into improved combat effectiveness. March 28, 1942, over Saint-Omer, France. Squadron leader Johnson leads 12 Spitfire Mark VB fighters on a fighter sweep over occupied territory. The aircraft are arranged in 3 sections of 4, each section operating as 2 pairs. Johnson flies with Flight Sergeant Bill Sizer as his wingman. Flight Lieutenant Buck McNair leads the second pair in Johnson's section. At 15,000 feet, they encounter 8 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters climbing from the direction of their home airfield. The engagement that follows demonstrates the evolved state of RAF fighter tactics 18 months after the Battle of Britain began. Johnson doesn't order a traditional attack where all 12 Spitfires would converge on the German formation. Instead, he directs each pair to engage a specific target while maintaining support for their partner. The result is 6 simultaneous 2 versus 1 engagements, rather than a confused melee involving 20 aircraft. Johnson and Sizer work together to engage a Bf-109, attempting to climb above the Spitfire formation. Johnson positions himself for a head-on attack, while Sizer maneuvers to cut off the German pilot's escape route. The Messerschmitt pilot, skilled and experienced, tries to use his aircraft's superior climbing performance to gain altitude advantage. But he's fighting 2 opponents, not 1. When he turns to avoid Johnson's head-on attack, he exposes himself to Sizer's deflection shot. When he tries to outdive the Spitfires, Johnson's aircraft intercepts his flight path. The coordinated attack leaves the German pilot with no good options. Sizer's cannon fire strikes the Bf-109's engine, setting it ablaze. The pilot bails out over his own territory. Meanwhile, McNair and his wingman engage another Messerschmitt, using different tactics. McNair draws the German pilot into a turning fight, while his partner climbs above the engagement. When the Bf-109 commits to pursuing McNair's Spitfire through a series of tight turns, the wingman dives from above, achieving perfect firing position on an opponent focused entirely on avoiding McNair's guns. The entire engagement lasts less than 4 minutes. When it ends, 4 German fighters have been shot down without the loss of a single RAF aircraft. The kill ratio of 4-0 would have been impossible using individual combat tactics. It required coordination, communication, and pilots trained to think in terms of mutual support rather than individual achievement. By mid-1942, the tactical transformation was spreading beyond fighter command. Royal Air Force pilots serving in the Western Desert against German and Italian forces were achieving even more dramatic results, using coordinated pair tactics. The open terrain and clear weather conditions in North Africa allowed for more sophisticated tactical maneuvers than were possible over Northern Europe. Wing Commander Clive Caldwell, an Australian pilot commanding No. 112 Squadron in Egypt, developed advanced variations of pair tactics specifically suited to desert conditions. His pilots operated in widely separated pairs that could cover enormous areas, while maintaining mutual support through radio communication and predetermined rally points. Caldwell's innovations included altitude separation, where pairs would operate at different levels to provide 3-dimensional coverage of assigned patrol areas. If one pair encountered enemy aircraft at low altitude, the higher pair could dive to assist while maintaining energy advantage. If threats appeared at high altitude, the lower pair could climb, while the higher pair engaged immediately. The results spoke for themselves. No. 112 Squadron achieved a kill ratio exceeding 6-1 during Caldwell's command, destroying 97 German and Italian aircraft while losing only 15 Hurricanes and Spitfires in air-to-air combat. These numbers represented more than statistical achievement. They meant young men who would have died using individual tactics were returning to base alive. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The United States Army Air Forces learned these lessons secondhand when America entered the war in December 1941. American fighter pilots arriving in Britain during 1942 received intensive training in RAF tactics before beginning combat operations. The learning curve was steep, but it was measured in weeks rather than years, because the RAF had already paid the price in blood for tactical innovation. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, flying Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, implemented pair tactics from his unit's first combat missions in April 1943. His pilots, many of whom were former RAF Eagle Squadron veterans, understood the importance of mutual support from their previous experience with fighter command. The 4th Fighter Group's combat record demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated tactics. Flying escort missions for 8th Air Force heavy bombers deep into German territory, Blakesley's pilots achieved kill ratios that exceeded anything accomplished by individual fighters during the Great War. The group destroyed over 1,000 German aircraft during 3 years of combat operations, while losing 261 of their own pilots. Similar transformations occurred in the Pacific Theater, where United States Navy and Marine Corps pilots adapted pair tactics to the unique conditions of carrier-based operations and island warfare. The vast distances involved in Pacific combat made coordination more challenging, but the principles remained constant. 2 pilots, working together, could achieve results impossible for individual operators. The mathematical advantage of pair tactics becomes clear when analyzing the geometry of aerial combat. An individual pilot engaging an enemy aircraft must divide his attention between offensive actions, aiming and firing his weapons, and defensive actions, avoiding enemy fire and maneuvering to prevent being shot down. This division of attention reduces effectiveness in both areas. 2 pilots operating as a coordinated team can specialize. One pilot focuses primarily on offensive action, while his partner concentrates on defensive support and situational awareness. The attacking pilot can pursue targets more aggressively because he knows his partner is covering potential threats. The supporting pilot can position himself for follow-up attacks or to engage additional enemies. The system is scalable and flexible. 4 pilots operating as 2 pairs can engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining mutual support. 8 pilots can cover enormous areas while concentrating firepower when necessary. The tactical options multiply exponentially as the number of coordinated aircraft increases, but coordination requires training, communication, and discipline that individual combat does not. Pilots must learn to suppress their natural instincts for self-preservation and aggressive pursuit of targets. They must trust their partners and follow tactical plans even when individual opportunities appear more attractive. The transformation from individual to pair tactics represents one of the most significant developments in military aviation history. It required a fundamental shift in thinking about aerial combat, from medieval concepts of single combat to modern team warfare. The pilots who made this transition under fire, who learned to trust their partners and coordinate their actions while enemy fighters tried to kill them, changed the nature of air warfare forever. Their legacy extends far beyond World War II. Modern fighter aircraft operate in coordinated formations using data links and computer systems that automate many of the communication challenges that 1943 pilots had to solve manually. But the fundamental principles remain unchanged. 2 fighters working together can achieve results that no individual pilot, regardless of skill or aircraft performance, can match. The young men who learned to fight in pairs over Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific proved that tactical innovation could overcome technological disadvantages and turn the tide of aerial warfare. Their story demonstrates that success in combat depends not just on individual courage and skill, but on the ability to work as part of a coordinated team where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Continuing with Part 2 of the script, the technological revolution that would complete the transformation from individual to pair tactics began in the research laboratories of Britain and America during the darkest days of 1942. While RAF pilots were learning to coordinate their attacks manually using primitive radio systems and visual signals, engineers were developing electronic systems that would automate many aspects of tactical coordination. The key breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Radar technology originally developed to detect incoming bomber formations. British scientists at the Telecommunications Research Establishment realized that the same principles used to track enemy aircraft could be applied to coordinate friendly fighters. The result was the first airborne intercept radar systems, primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for their time. Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham of No. 85 Squadron became the first RAF pilot to achieve consistent success using airborne radar in combination with pair tactics. Flying a twin-engine Bristol Beaufighter equipped with AI Mark IV radar, Cunningham operated with a radar operator who could detect enemy aircraft at ranges exceeding 4 miles, far beyond visual identification distance. But the real innovation came when Cunningham began coordinating with single-seat fighters operating in traditional visual formations. His radar-equipped Beaufighter would locate enemy formations and direct pairs of Spitfires or Hurricanes to intercept positions. The result was a three-dimensional tactical system where radar provided early warning and positioning, while visual fighters provided the speed and maneuverability necessary for engagement. October 23, 1942, over the English Channel. Cunningham's Beaufighter orbits at 20,000 feet, while 4 Spitfires from No. 601 Squadron patrol in loose pairs 5,000 feet below. His radar operator, Flight Sergeant Jimmy Rawnsley, detects a formation of German aircraft crossing the French coast at low altitude, heading toward Portsmouth. Instead of engaging directly, Cunningham vectors the Spitfire pairs to intercept positions calculated to achieve maximum tactical advantage. The first pair positions itself between the German formation and its return route to France. The second pair climbs to altitude advantage above the projected intercept point. The coordination is precise, calculated, and devastating. When the engagement begins, the German pilots find themselves caught in a coordinated trap. Their escape route is blocked by one pair of Spitfires, while another pair attacks from above with energy advantage. The individual skill of the German pilots becomes irrelevant against the systematic application of coordinated tactics supported by electronic surveillance. This integration of technology and tactics represented the next evolution in aerial warfare. Radar provided information advantage, allowing friendly forces to see enemy movements before visual contact. Radio communication enabled coordination across distances that would have been impossible using traditional visual signals. The combination multiplied the effectiveness of pair tactics exponentially. The United States Navy developed similar systems for carrier-based operations in the Pacific. The Fighter Direction Center aboard aircraft carriers used radar to track both friendly and enemy aircraft, directing combat air patrols to intercept threats while coordinating attacks on enemy formations. The scale was larger than European operations, but the principles remained identical. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, flying a Grumman F-6F Hellcat from USS Essex, became the Navy's leading ace, using tactics that combined radar direction with coordinated pair attacks. His technique involved positioning multiple pairs of fighters at different altitudes and compass bearings around enemy formations, then coordinating simultaneous attacks that overwhelmed enemy defensive capabilities. June 19, 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. McCampbell leads 8 Hellcats against a formation of 40 Japanese aircraft approaching Task Force 58. The numerical odds appear impossible, but McCampbell's tactical system turns disadvantage into victory. Using radar vectors from Essex, McCampbell positions his 4 pairs of fighters around the Japanese formation before they detect American presence. When he initiates the attack, the Japanese pilots find themselves under assault from multiple directions simultaneously. Individual Japanese fighters, regardless of their skill or aircraft performance, cannot coordinate defensive action against systematically applied offensive pressure. The engagement lasts 12 minutes. When it ends, 19 Japanese aircraft have been destroyed without the loss of a single American fighter. McCampbell personally accounts for 7 kills, but the victory belongs to the tactical system rather than individual heroics. The mathematical advantage of coordinated pairs, supported by radar direction and radio communication, has proven decisive against superior numbers. Analysis of Pacific combat records reveals that American fighter squadrons using coordinated pair tactics achieved kill ratios, averaging 8-to-1 against Japanese opposition during the final 2 years of the war. These numbers represented more than statistical superiority. They meant that young American pilots were surviving missions that would have been suicidal using individual combat tactics. The psychological transformation was as significant as the tactical one. Pilots who had been trained to think of themselves as lone warriors had to learn to function as team members. The change required suppressing natural instincts for individual achievement and glory in favor of collective success and mutual survival. Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson, flying Republic P-47 Thunderbolts with the 56th Fighter Group, described the mental adjustment in his combat diary. Everything I learned about being a fighter pilot was wrong. I thought it was about being the best individual pilot, the fastest gun, the guy who could outturn and outshoot everyone else. But staying alive and winning means being the best team member. The training programs evolved to reflect this new reality. Fighter pilot candidates learned formation, flying, and radio procedures before they touched combat aircraft. They practiced coordinated attacks using complex scenarios that required split-second timing and perfect communication. The washout rate increased as instructors eliminated candidates who couldn't adapt to team tactics. Advanced training included scenarios where pairs of student pilots faced superior numbers of aircraft flown by instructors. Students who reverted to individual tactics were quickly overwhelmed and eliminated from the program. Those who maintained coordination and mutual support could defeat larger numbers of opponents despite being less experienced individually. The industrial implications were enormous. Aircraft manufacturers redesigned fighter cockpits to improve radio communication capabilities. Engine companies developed more reliable systems to reduce the mechanical failures that could separate pairs during critical moments. Weapons designers created gun sights and ammunition systems optimized for coordinated attacks rather than individual marksmanship. Republic Aviation's P-47 Thunderbolt incorporated design features specifically intended to support pair tactics. The aircraft's exceptional dive performance allowed pairs to maintain formation during high-speed attacks. Its rugged construction enabled pilots to fly aggressively, knowing their aircraft could absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter fighters. North American Aviation's P-51 Mustang represented the ultimate expression of tactical evolution. The aircraft's exceptional range allowed pairs of fighters to operate deep into enemy territory while maintaining fuel reserves for extended combat. Its performance characteristics were optimized for the energy management tactics that made coordinated attacks possible. But technology alone wasn't sufficient. The most advanced aircraft was useless without pilots trained to exploit its capabilities through coordinated tactics. The training establishment had to rebuild itself around team concepts rather than individual achievement. Colonel Francis Gabreski, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, established training programs that emphasized mutual support over personal scores. His pilots practiced attacks where individual achievement was subordinated to pair effectiveness. The psychological adjustment was difficult for pilots accustomed to thinking of themselves as elite individuals. The hardest part wasn't learning to fly formation or coordinate attacks, Gabreski explained in his post-war memoir. The hardest part was accepting that my survival depended on someone else, and that someone else's survival depended on me. That's a level of trust that goes beyond anything they teach you in flight school. The trust factor became critical as combat intensity increased during the final years of the war. Pilots operating over heavily defended targets needed absolute confidence in their partners. Any hesitation or failure to coordinate could result in catastrophic losses during missions where individual errors multiplied across entire formations. March 6, 1944. Over Berlin. Major George Preddy leads 16 P-51 Mustangs from the 352nd Fighter Group on escort duty for B-17 bombers attacking aircraft factories in the German capital. The mission represents one of the deepest penetrations into enemy territory attempted by American forces. German defenses include more than 200 Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, supported by coordinated flak batteries and ground-controlled intercept radar. The mathematical odds strongly favor the defenders, who can choose when and where to engage while operating over their own territory with unlimited fuel and ammunition. But Preddy's tactical system turns these advantages into liabilities. His 16 Mustangs operate as 8 coordinated pairs, each pair assigned specific responsibilities within the overall escort. Formation. High pairs maintain altitude advantage and early warning capability. Low pairs provide close escort for the bombers. Trail pairs cover the formation's rear and flanks. When German fighters attack, they encounter not individual opponents but a coordinated defensive system. Pairs that are engaged directly receive immediate support from adjacent pairs. The systematic application of mutual support principles prevents German pilots from achieving the sustained firing opportunities necessary to destroy heavily armed B-17 bombers. The engagement continues for 43 minutes, from initial contact until the last German fighter breaks off. During that time, Preddy's 8 pairs destroy 27 German aircraft while losing only 2 Mustangs. The kill ratio of 13.5 to 1 would have been impossible using individual tactics against such overwhelming numbers. More importantly, the bomber formation reaches its target and completes its mission. 42. B-17s deliver their bomb loads on target and return safely to England. The strategic success depends entirely on the tactical success of coordinated fighter escort using pair tactics that didn't exist 3 years earlier. By late 1944, the transformation was complete. Allied fighter forces in both Europe and the Pacific operated using coordinated tactics as standard procedure. The individual dogfighting skills that had dominated aerial combat since 1914 were relegated to emergency situations where coordination broke down or communication failed. The German Luftwaffe, despite pioneering many aspects of coordinated fighter tactics, found itself unable to adapt to the systematic application of these principles by numerically superior Allied forces. German pilots, often more experienced individually than their opponents, were overwhelmed by coordinated attacks that exploited the mathematical advantages of team tactics. Oberst Adolf Galland, commanding German fighter forces during the final years of the war, recognized the tactical revolution, but lacked the resources to implement systematic changes. German training programs were abbreviated by fuel shortages and pilot losses. New pilots reached operational squadrons with insufficient experience in coordinated tactics. The Americans and British learned to fight as teams while we remained individuals, Galland wrote in his post-war analysis. Individual skill became irrelevant when facing coordinated opposition with numerical superiority. We lost the tactical battle before we lost the strategic war. The numbers supported Galland's assessment. During 1944, Allied fighter forces achieved overall kill ratios exceeding 10 to 1 against German opposition. These ratios reflected not just superior aircraft or pilot training, but systematic application of coordinated tactics that maximized the effectiveness of available resources. The final vindication of pair tactics came during the massive air battles over Germany during the winter and spring of 1945. Allied bomber formations escorted by coordinated fighter pairs penetrated German airspace at will, destroying the industrial infrastructure that supported the Nazi war effort. German fighters, operating individually or in small, uncoordinated groups, proved incapable of preventing these attacks. April 16, 1945, over Dresden. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer leads 32 P-51 Mustangs from the 352nd Fighter Group on one of the final major escort missions of the European War. German opposition includes the last operational squadrons of the Luftwaffe, flying advanced aircraft, including some of the first operational jet fighters. The technological advantage belongs partially to the Germans. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter can outrun any propeller-driven aircraft. Its cannon armament can destroy bombers with brief firing passes. Individual German pilots flying these advanced aircraft possess speed and firepower advantages that should be decisive. But Meyer's tactical system neutralizes these advantages through systematic coordination. His 16 pairs of Mustangs operate at different altitudes and positions relative to the bomber formation. When German jets attack, they find themselves engaging not individual fighters, but coordinated pairs that can predict and counter their attack routes. The jet's speed advantage becomes a liability when facing coordinated opposition. Their high-speed attack runs prevent them from maneuvering defensively when American fighters coordinate to block escape routes. The systematic application of pair tactics traps advanced German aircraft in situations where their technological advantages become irrelevant. During the final air battles of the European War, Allied fighters achieved kill ratios that exceeded anything recorded in military history. The combination of coordinated tactics, superior numbers, and technological advancement created overwhelming advantage that German forces couldn't counter despite individual heroics by experienced pilots. The transformation from individual to pair tactics had required 4 years of bloody learning, but it fundamentally changed the nature of aerial warfare. Pilots who learned to suppress their individual instincts and operate as coordinated teams achieved results that no amount of personal skill could duplicate. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The legacy of this tactical revolution extends far beyond World War II. Modern fighter aircraft operate using data links and computer systems that automate many coordination functions, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged. Two aircraft working together can achieve results impossible for individual operators, regardless of technological advancement. Today's F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs fly in coordinated formations using secure digital communications that would have seemed like science fiction to 1943 pilots. But they follow tactical doctrine directly descended from the pair tactics developed over the skies of Europe and the Pacific 8 decades ago. The young men who learned to fight as teams rather than individuals proved that tactical innovation could overcome technological disadvantages and numerical inferiority. Their willingness to abandon traditional concepts of individual heroism in favor of systematic teamwork changed military aviation forever. Their story demonstrates that success in combat depends not just on personal courage and skill, but on the ability to function as part of a coordinated system where individual achievement serves collective goals. The pilots who mastered pair tactics showed that the mathematics of warfare favor coordination over individual excellence. Lieutenant MacLachlan and Flight Sergeant Caldwell, diving toward German fighters over the North Sea in September 1943, carried forward a tactical tradition that began with desperate improvisation and evolved into systematic doctrine. Their coordinated attack represented the culmination of 4 years of bloody learning about the realities of modern aerial warfare. The German pilots they engaged, skilled individuals flying capable aircraft, found themselves overwhelmed by systematic application of coordinated tactics they couldn't counter. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes from initial contact to final victory. When it ended, 4 German fighters had been destroyed without Allied loss. That brief engagement over the North Sea demonstrated the complete transformation of aerial combat from individual dueling to systematic team warfare. The young men who learned to fight in pairs had revolutionized military aviation and proved that coordinated tactics could achieve mathematical advantages that no amount of individual skill could overcome. Their legacy lives on in every coordinated military operation conducted by modern air forces. The principle they established, that teamwork multiplies individual capability exponentially, remains as relevant today as it was in the desperate skies over wartime Europe. They showed that sometimes survival and victory require abandoning traditional concepts of heroism in favor of systematic cooperation that serves goals larger than individual achievement.